Imagine holding a book, hundreds of years old, its vellum pages filled with strange, beautiful illustrations of plants that defy botanical classification, cosmic diagrams unlike any known constellations, and, well, enigmatic bathing scenes. Yet it's all written in a language no one on Earth has ever been able to read. This isn't some fantasy novel plucked from the pages of a magical library. It's a real-life enigma. A codex that has stumped the greatest minds for centuries, from legendary World War codebreakers to the most advanced modern AI.
It's the kind of mystery that truly captures the imagination, isn't it? A tangible artifact, a genuine piece of history that simply refuses to yield its secrets no matter how much intellectual firepower gets thrown at it. What's truly fascinating here is how it continues to defy decipherment despite such concerted, persistent effort and, the application of increasingly sophisticated tools and brilliant minds.
It really is. And the fact that it continues to evade understanding is what makes it so endlessly captivating. Today, we're plunging into the baffling world of the Voynich Manuscript, a genuine historical artifact that challenges everything we think we know about codes, language, and even the very nature of an elaborate hoax. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack its physical mysteries, delve into the swirling theories about who created it and why was it genius encryption or an elaborate prank, and explore how its enduring inscrutability continues to captivate everyone, from serious scholars to online conspiracy theorists in this digital age. Okay, let's unpack this monumental puzzle. Let's begin with the object itself, this unreadable masterpiece. What exactly is the Voynich Manuscript? We know it's an illustrated codex, handwritten in an entirely unknown script that the research community commonly refers to as Voynichese. But what does it actually look like? What's it made of? And what are its physical characteristics?
Right. Well, it's truly a remarkable piece of craftsmanship, even if its content remains elusive. Codicological studies, meaning the examination of a book's physical makeup, like its paper, binding, and ink, tell us a tremendous amount. The manuscript itself measures approximately 23.5 by 16.2 by 5 centimeters. So it's not a massive, unwieldy tome, but a substantial hand-sized volume, easy to carry and consult. It currently contains around 240 vellum pages, gathered into what are called quires, or folded gatherings of sheets. However, evidence like page numbering gaps suggests that the original manuscript likely had at least 272 pages across 20 quires. So that means some pages were already missing even before the Polish book dealer Wilfred Voynich acquired it back in 1912.
So it's incomplete, but still contains a vast amount of material, which itself offers a lot of data for analysis. And the material itself, the parchment, is it as old as we think?
That's a truly crucial detail because it immediately helps us rule out many of the more modern hoax theories. Radiocarbon dating, a highly precise method, was conducted at the University of Arizona in 2009. This testing unequivocally placed the creation of the parchment between 1404 and 1438. This is a very tight window in the early 15th century, and significantly, it was consistent across all samples tested.
Wow.
Yeah, this effectively rules out any possibility of it being a modern forgery by Wilfred Voynich himself or any one of the last few centuries. Further protein tests in 2014 confirmed the vellum is made from calfskin. And multispectral analysis, which uses different wavelengths of light to reveal hidden details, showed it wasn't a palimpsest, meaning it wasn't written over existing text. The quality of the parchment is quite average, actually, with typical medieval deficiencies like small holes, but it was prepared meticulously, indicating the scribe knew what they were doing.
Okay. Given its age, how much of this book, its binding, its covers, is truly original to the 15th century, or has it been altered over time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The current goat skin binding and covers are definitely not original. They date to its possession by the Collegio Romano, the Jesuit college in Rome. Interestingly, historical and forensic analysis points to an earlier, potentially original binding. Insect holes in the first and last folios suggest there was a wooden cover before the current one, and discoloration on the edges of the pages hints at an inside cover made of tanned leather.
Ah.
So, while the current casing is relatively recent, the internal pages and their original structure betray a much older history.
So a 15th century book, rebound later, but the core materials are definitively old. What about the ink and the paints used in those fascinating illustrations? Was the creator using expensive materials or something more common?
Well, the analysis of the inks and pigments offers another window into its creation. We know the text and the outlines for the figures were done with a quill pen and what's known as iron gall ink. Microscopically, the inks used for the drawings, the main text, and even the page numbers appear similar, suggesting they were applied around the same time, possibly by the same hand. Energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, a technique that bombards a sample with X-rays and analyzes the emitted energy to identify elements, was used in 2009. It revealed the inks contained significant amounts of carbon, iron, sulfur, potassium, and calcium, with trace amounts of copper and sometimes zinc. While initial EDS didn't detect lead, later X-ray diffraction did find potassium lead oxide, potassium hydrogen sulfate, and syngenite in one of the tested samples, indicating some rather complex chemistry, possibly for a binder or an additive.
Interesting. And the colors?
As for the colors used in the illustrations, blues, whites, reds, greens, they are applied somewhat crudely, perhaps a little after the outlines were drawn. The blue pigment is ground azurite, a common mineral pigment. The white is likely a mixture of egg white and calcium carbonate used as a binder and whitener. The green appears to be copper or copper chlorine resonate, possibly a tachyte, giving it that distinct green hue. And the red-brown is red ochre, a naturally occurring iron oxide pigment.
So relatively inexpensive stuff then.
Exactly. Critically, these pigments were all relatively inexpensive and commonly available for the period, suggesting the creator wasn't necessarily using rare or exotic materials, which might be another clue, to its origin or purpose.
That's quite a detailed material analysis, and I've heard some talk about visible modifications to the text or illustrations. Is there evidence of that, or is it purely speculation?
No, it's not speculation at all. Computer scientist Jorge Stolfi, among others, has noted visible modifications on several folios. These appear as darker ink used over a fainter, earlier script. It's almost like a second pass, perhaps to clarify or correct the original writing, or maybe even to add emphasis. This tells us the manuscript wasn't simply written in one go. There was an element of revision or elaboration, which could be significant in understanding its creation process.
So we have this ancient book made of calfskin with inks and paints consistent with the early 15th century. But the real puzzle, of course, is the Voyniches itself. Tell us about this unidentified script. What does it actually look like on the page, beyond being just unknown?
Right. Well, the vast majority of the manuscript is written from left to right, in this completely unique script. While there's some scholarly debate over the exact number of distinct characters, generally 20 to 25 characters account for almost all the text, there are a few dozen rarer ones, appearing only once or twice, possibly as abbreviations or unique symbols. Visually, many characters resemble combinations of common Roman alphabet forms, but they are arranged in sequences that defy easy comparison. There's no obvious punctuation like periods or commas. What's particularly fascinating, and a huge clue for cryptographers, is the ductus, or the flow of the writing. It's incredibly smooth and fluid, suggesting the scribe was writing quickly and naturally, almost as if transcribing a spoken language or following a known, fluent system.
Rather than slowly enciphering character by painstaking character.
Precisely, which is what you'd expect from a complex code. This fluid handwriting, what some call calligraphic grace, is one of the strongest arguments against it being a simple letter-by-letter substitution cipher.
That smooth and fluid ductus is a significant observation, implying a natural or at least fluent writing process. But are there any familiar words in it? Any exceptions to the Voynich's rule that might offer a lifeline to understanding?
Well, there are a few tantalizing exceptions, which honestly only deepen the mystery rather than resolving it. On the very first page, folio 1R, there's a sequence of Latin letters in the margin, parallel to the unknown script, and a now unreadable signature in the bottom margin, Jakub Szetepanec, though you need UV light to see it today. The fact that Voynich himself could apparently see it back in 1912 suggests it has faded considerably.
Okay.
Then on folio 66R, in the bottom left corner near a drawing of a nude man, a small number of words have been tentatively read as Dummstyle, which is a High German phrase meaning a widow's share.
A widow's share, that's specific, and very unusual, right?
Highly unusual. Further into the manuscript, in the astronomical section, specifically on folios 70V to 73V, the diagrams of the months have names for 10 of them from March to December written in Latin script. Their spellings, however, hint at medieval French, Italian, or Iberian languages, not pure classical Latin. For instance, October is spelled octo.
So we get these strange glimpses, Latin months with a regional flavor, a German phrase, and a faded Latin signature, but the rest of the text remains utterly unintelligible to us despite all the attempts.
Precisely. There's also Micotinese on folio 116V, which are 4 lines written in distorted Latin script. The lettering itself resembles European alphabets from the late 14th and 15th centuries, consistent with the dating of the manuscript. But the actual words themselves just don't make sense in any known language. Whether these rare scraps of Latin text were original or added later by a different hand, perhaps as a commentary or a placeholder, is still unknown. These inconsistencies add immense layers of complexity. Are they deliberate clues, or simply historical red herrings that have led researchers down countless blind alleys?
That leads us right into the bewildering illustrations. Since we can't read the text, researchers have tried to understand the manuscript through its pictures. It's divided into 6 main sections based on these distinct illustration styles and subjects, almost like 6 different chapters in a very strange book.
That's a pretty accurate way to put it. The largest and perhaps most perplexing section is the herbal section, which spans 112 folios. Each page typically shows 1 or 2 plants with some accompanying text, much like a European herbal of the period. But here's the profound twist that has baffled botanists and historians alike. Almost none of the plants are unambiguously identifiable. Many appear to be composite, meaning they have the roots of one plant, the leaves of another, and the flowers of a third, perhaps even from entirely different species.
Composite plants, really?
Yeah. Only a wild pansy and a maidenhair fern have been identified with a reasonable degree of certainty. This isn't just a failure to identify. It's a fundamental paradox at the heart of the Voynich, forcing us to question its very intent.
Composite plants. That sounds like something out of a fantastical bestiary or a medieval grimoire, not a practical herbal meant for medicine or botany. It suggests an artistic license or a symbolic meaning, perhaps, rather than a factual one.
It truly does. It immediately raises questions about its practical application. If this was a medicinal text, how could you use these plants if they don't actually exist? Then we have the astronomical section with 21 folios featuring circular diagrams that strongly suggest astronomy or astrology, complete with suns, moons, and stars. There's a series of 12 diagrams depicting conventional zodiac symbols, Pisces, Taurus, Sagittarius, and so on. But here's the really interesting and frankly bizarre part. Each of these diagrams has 30 small, nude female figures, often crowned, holding what appear to be labeled stars or tethered to them by a cord.
Tethered to bars?
Yep. The last 2 pages of this section, representing Aquarius and Capricornus, are missing, adding another layer of incompleteness to the puzzle.
Nude women tethered to stars. That's truly a departure from any conventional astronomical treatise I can imagine. What do scholars make of such peculiar imagery, and how does it fit or not fit into the broader context of the manuscript sections?
The nymphs, as they're often called, are a huge point of contention and speculation. Some theories suggest they might be allegorical representations of celestial bodies or astrological influences, perhaps linked to a specific type of fertility or medical astrology. The sheer repetition of them across the zodiacal diagrams is striking. Next, we move into the balneological section, 20 folios packed with dense, continuous text interspersed with drawings. These mostly show small, nude women, some crowned, bathing in pools or tubs connected by an elaborate network of pipes.
Elaborate pipes.
Yeah, some scholars interpret this as a treatise on health and hygiene, or perhaps even a medieval spa guide, though the fantastical elements of the plumbing and figures are again confounding. There's even a bifolio, folio 78 verso and 81 recto, that forms an integrated design with water flowing across the pages, indicating a sophisticated layout, despite the odd subject matter.
So from mysterious non-existent plants to celestial nymphs and communal bathing women, this book is certainly eclectic, to say the least. It's a dizzying array of imagery. How does this remarkable eclecticism influence our attempts to categorize or understand its purpose?
Well, the eclecticism makes categorization incredibly difficult, almost impossible. And it gets even more obscure with the cosmological section, 13 folios with even more complex circular diagrams, though their nature is much less clear. This section also includes one of the most famous and largest foldouts, a 6-page spread known as the Rosettes folio. It depicts 9 islands, or rosettes, connected by what look like causeways, and they contain castles, cityscapes, and even what many interpret as a volcano erupting.
A volcano! Wow, that's incredibly specific and unusual for a medieval codex. It certainly suggests a certain geographical context or perhaps a cataclysmic event. What about the final sections?
The pharmaceutical section has 34 folios, with many labeled drawings of isolated plant parts, roots, leaves, and so on, alongside objects resembling apothecary jars. The style ranges from the mundane, like what might be a common herb, to the utterly fantastical, almost alien forms. And finally, the recipe section has 22 folios of full pages of text broken into short paragraphs, each marked with a distinctive star in the left margin. 5 folios in the manuscript contain only text, with no illustrations at all, leaving us purely with the baffling script.
So what does this all mean for its overall impression? You mentioned it might be a pharmacopoeia or a work on medieval or early modern medicine, but these bizarre details, the unidentifiable plants, the bathing women, they truly defy a clear, single interpretation.
Exactly. While astrological considerations were indeed common in medicine of the period, tying specific constellations or celestial events to health, The particular details in the Voynich remain highly speculative. The herbal section, for instance, despite being the largest, has largely seen failed attempts to identify the plants with actual specimens, or even with known contemporaneous herbals beyond, the pansy and maidenhair fern. The fact that many appear to be composite further complicates any straightforward medical interpretation, making it difficult to imagine this was a practical guide for physicians or apothecaries. It's this very defiance of clear purpose that fuels so many of the ongoing theories, and it makes it such a rich ground for speculation and debate.
And speaking of theories, let's move into the relentless quest to decode this thing. It's been a battlefield of hypotheses, hasn't it? Starting with statistical analysis. This isn't just a random scribble, is it? The sheer volume of text must lend itself to some kind of quantitative assessment.
Oh, far from it being random scribble. The manuscript contains over 170,000 characters, forming about 35,000 words, with roughly 8,114 unique word types. That's an abundant amount of data for statistical analysis, allowing for sophisticated computational linguistics. And what's truly remarkable is its consistency and regularity. The words typically range from 2 to 10 letters, and there are very specific patterns in character distribution. Certain characters appear only at the beginning of a word, others only in the middle, and some only at the end. This is highly suggestive of a structured linguistic system, much like specific grammatical functions or morphemes in known languages.
That sounds like a structured language, not just random letters. Are there any examples of these structural rules that really stand out to cryptographers?
Indeed, Professor Gonzalo Rubio, an expert in ancient languages and linguistics, highlighted a key peculiarity. He noted that grammatical markers, like the plural "es" or the past tense "ed" in English, never appear in the middle of words in the Voynich manuscript. Never. He stated that this is unheard of for any Indo-European, Hungarian, or Finnish language. This is a significant point, as it immediately rules out many conventional linguistic structures that rely on inflections within a word, suggesting a morphology unlike most European languages.
So the statistics are peculiar, yet remarkably consistent. But what do they really tell us? I know there are contrasting interpretations, almost as if the data itself is arguing with different camps of researchers.
Absolutely. On one hand, many point to strong indicators of a natural language. For instance, Diego Amancio's team in 2014 found statistical properties like word length distributions and patterns of repetition that were remarkably similar to other known books written in natural languages. They concluded the text is an actual language, not random gibberish, and even claimed to identify keywords, though they didn't offer a full decipherment. More recently, in 2021, linguists Claire Bauern and Luke Lindman conducted a detailed analysis. They found that while character sequences are highly predictable, indicated by a low H2 value of around 2, meaning the character sequences are highly repetitive and predictable, compared to natural languages typically less predictable 3 to 4.
Okay.
Higher levels of organization display properties strikingly similar to natural languages.
So it's predictable at a micro level, almost machine-like, but coherent at a macro level, like a human language. That's a fascinating paradox.
Precisely. This paradox leads them to dismiss both theories of random gibberish and simple substitution or polyalphabetic ciphers, leaning instead towards an encoded or constructed language. The word frequencies, for example, follow a Zipf-ian distribution, meaning a few words are used very often, and many words are used rarely, a pattern characteristic of all natural languages and a strong indicator of linguistic meaning.
Right, the classic Zipf's law.
Exactly. Furthermore, its morphological complexity, measured by a Métis-R index, is similar to Iranian, Germanic, and Romance languages. This suggests that the text isn't just random, it has a structure that mimics complex linguistic systems.
What's truly mind-bending about the statistics, then, is that the very data we rely on for answers seems to be arguing with itself. It's a statistical Rorschach test, revealing more about our own assumptions than the manuscript itself. It challenges the fundamental tools we use to understand language. And you mentioned the possibility of multiple languages within the manuscript earlier, didn't you, rather than just one uniform text?
Yes, that's right. Bauern also noted patterns suggesting Voynich A and Voynich B sections, which might represent different languages or perhaps different encoding methods, possibly even by different scribes. Voynich A appears predominantly in the herbal and pharmaceutical sections, while Voynich B is found in the balneological, astrological, and some other medicinal herbal parts. The most common vocabulary items of these two languages are substantially different.
Which could indicate a shift in linguistic style, a different author, or maybe a different cipher system being applied to distinct sections.
Exactly. This adds a huge layer of complexity for anyone attempting to unify a decipherment.
That's a significant twist. Different scribes or even different ciphers within the same book. This leads us to the various language hypotheses. It's a spectrum of possibilities, each with passionate proponents and fierce detractors. The initial thought for many, especially early 20th century cryptographers like the brilliant William F. Friedman's NSA team, was that it had to be a cipher.
The letter-based cipher theory was, for a long time, the prevailing one. The core idea was that it's meaningful text in a known European language, intentionally obscured by a cipher that operated on individual letters. But the statistical properties of Voynich just don't match typical ciphers of the era. Simple substitution ciphers, where each letter is consistently replaced by another, are immediately ruled out because the letter frequencies, how often each character appears, simply don't align with what we see in any known language.
Right, like E is being super common in English.
Precisely. The Voynich doesn't show that kind of predictable pattern for its most frequent characters. Similarly, more complex systems like nomenclator ciphers, which use a codebook for common words and names, or homophonic ciphers, which use multiple symbols for frequent letters to obscure frequency patterns, are also unlikely. This is because these systems usually require a larger number of distinct letter shapes or symbols, which we don't observe in Voynich's, with its relatively small character set. And polyalphabetic ciphers, like the Vigenère cipher, which crucially was invented after the manuscript's estimated date, in the mid-16th century tend to produce ciphertexts where all cipher shapes occur with roughly equal probability. That's also not what we see here, where some characters are far more frequent than others.
Okay. So it's not a straightforward code that just swaps letters, but is there a more complex cipher idea that could fit the unusual character groupings and repetitions we see in the Voynich?
Well, there is a suggestion of a verbose cipher, where perhaps a single letter of original plaintext might be expanded into a longer group of fake letters in the ciphered text. Think of it like this. Instead of just A, meaning B, A might become XYZ. The presence of many tightly grouped shapes in Voynich's like or, all, ain, and fascinating repetitions like or hints at this. It's similar to how Roman numerals like CCC or XXXX are formed by repeating a basic symbol.
Ah, I see.
This could explain the apparent word-like structures but still maintain a high level of obscurity. But it's still just a hypothesis, It requires a breakthrough to prove the underlying plaintext.
Okay, so if not a traditional cipher, what about shorthand? Could it be a highly abbreviated, perhaps even personal scientific diary?
That theory was put forth by Joseph Martin Feely in 1943. He proposed it was Roger Bacon's scientific diary, written in a private shorthand system with extensive abbreviations. The idea was that Bacon, known for his vast scientific knowledge, might have created a personal code to protect his findings. However, this theory was largely rejected by other scholars who found his proposed readings and his system of abbreviations not considered acceptable and lacking consistency. It seems the shorthand wasn't rigorous enough to stand up to scrutiny.
And steganography, where meaningful information is hidden within seemingly meaningless text, that's always a tantalizing thought, almost like a secret message within a secret message.
It is, and it's a very old technique, described by the cryptographer Johannes Trithemius as early as 1499. The theory suggests the text itself is mostly meaningless, a cover, but has hidden information embedded in subtle details like the second letter of every word, or even the length, shape, or slight imperfections of pen strokes. The idea of extracting a hidden plaintext using a cardon grill, a perforated paper overlay that reveals specific characters, has been floated in steganographic discussions. However, a major problem here is that the cardon grill was invented around 1550, more than a century after the manuscript's estimated creation.
Right, that's a big timing issue.
Yeah. While it demonstrates how such a hidden text could be produced artificially, its anachronism makes it an unlikely method for the Voynich. Plus, the irregular arrangement of words and letters in the manuscript makes applying such a fixed grid quite difficult. Steganographic claims are notoriously hard to prove or disprove because the hidden text can be arbitrarily difficult to find, often requiring an unprovable key to unlock them.
So, the language hypotheses lean towards either a truly unknown natural language or a meticulously constructed language. What are some of the more intriguing natural language proposals?
Well, one linguist, Jacques, jokingly suggested Chinese at first, then later seriously considered Vietnamese or Chinese due to word length statistics, as many East and Central Asian languages have predominantly single-syllable morphemes. The frequent repetition of words in Voynich's might align with a language that uses tone or repetition to convey different meanings. James R. Child of the U.S. National Security Agency, an Indo-European linguist, proposed in 1976 that it was a hitherto unknown North Germanic dialect, citing a skeletal syntax reminiscent of certain Germanic languages. A rather niche hypothesis, but interesting.
And what about the more recent attempts? I remember hearing about Professor Stephen Bax, who approached it from a different angle.
Yes. Stephen Bax in 2014 used a bottom-up approach, focusing on identifying and tentatively translating proper nouns in conjunction with illustrations, much like how Egyptian hieroglyphs were deciphered. He tried to match names of plants or constellations that were identifiable in the images with similar-sounding words in various languages. He provisionally translated 14 characters and 10 words, suggesting it's a treatise in a Near Eastern or Asian natural language. Unfortunately, no full translation was made before his death in 2017, leaving his partial work as a tantalizing glimpse. More recently, a 2023 deep learning study utilizing AI to analyze linguistic features suggested its strongest resemblance was to Kochki, an ancient Indian script historically used for mercantile records. This opens up entirely new geographical and cultural possibilities, far from the European context most theories focus on.
An ancient Indian script, that would be a huge departure from the typical European context. But there was also a claim about Aztec plants and the Nahuatl language, wasn't there? That sounds like quite a dramatic and frankly contradictory proposition given the manuscript's dating.
Yes, that's the theory proposed by Arthur O. Tucker and Rexford H. Talbert in 2014. They claim to identify 37 plants, 6 animals, and 1 mineral from an Aztec herbal, suggesting the language was Nahuatl, the Aztec language. They even went so far as to date the manuscript to 1521-1576, which directly and fundamentally contradicts the radiocarbon dating of the vellum to 1404-1438.
Yeah, that's a massive clash.
Huge. While they argued the vellum might have been prepared and then stored for over a century before being used, other researchers heavily criticized this theory. They viewed the alleged identifications as highly coincidental resemblances, or the result of a skilled forger trying to create a convincing, albeit anachronistic, imitation. A Nahuatl specialist, Professor Stephanie Wood, publicly rejected their proposed readings as pure nonsense. This is a classic example of how a compelling narrative can clash with established scientific evidence, making the mystery even more intractable.
It's precisely why it's such a persistent mystery. Every solution seems to create more questions or directly clash with established evidence. So if it's not an unknown natural language, could it be a constructive language, a kind of proto-Esperanto designed from scratch?
This was a theory that William F. Friedman, the famous American cryptologist, came to lean towards after his extensive attempts to break it as a cipher. He theorized it could be a primitive, synthetic, universal language, an early attempt at a philosophical language designed to organize knowledge logically. Perhaps predating known examples like John Wilkins's philosophical language from 1668. The idea is that if categories were subdivided by suffixes, for instance, all plant names starting similarly and then differentiating, it could explain the highly repetitive nature of the text and the unique distribution of characters.
Okay.
However, no one has been able to assign a plausible, consistent meaning to any of the proposed prefixes, stems, or suffixes, which would be essential for a constructed language of this type to be functional and meaningful.
And then there's the more out there theory, almost bordering on the spiritual glossolalia, or speaking in tongues. That would certainly explain why no one can read it.
This controversial idea was put forth by Jerry Kennedy and Rob Churchill in 2004, and it certainly raises eyebrows. They suggested the manuscript might be a spontaneous stream of consciousness text, possibly inspired by voices or a trance-like state, a form of automatic writing. They drew intriguing parallels to the medieval mystic Hildegard von Bingen, whose migraine-induced drawings often featured streams of stars and repetitive figures similar to the Voynich's nymphs. Hildegard's visions were intensely personal and often depicted in a highly symbolic, non-literal way, much like the Voynich.
That's a fascinating comparison.
It is. While compelling in its ability to explain the text's uniqueness and resistance to decipherment, this theory is inherently difficult to prove or disprove without deciphering the text. Even Kennedy and Churchill themselves weren't fully convinced, acknowledging it could also be a hoax or a forgotten synthetic language.
This brings us to the core of the history and authorship debate. The persistent, tantalizing question of whether it's a brilliant, unbreakable encryption, the last remnant of a lost genius mind, or an elaborate, incredibly successful prank that has fooled generations of scholars.
Indeed. The manuscript's known journey begins with the earliest confirmed mention in a 1639 letter. This was from Georg Beresch, a Prague alchemist who was utterly baffled by a book he called his Sphinx. He sought help deciphering it from the famous Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher in Rome, who was known for his work on Egyptian hieroglyphs. This letter is absolutely crucial because it confirms the manuscript's existence long before Wilfrid Voynich acquired it.
Which immediately helps rule out Voynich himself being a modern forger.
Exactly. That's a key point.
So we know it existed in the early to mid-17th century, and that famous Marcy letter, which seems to be the linchpin for so many early theories.
Right. After Baresh's death, his friend Jan Marek Marcy, the rector of Charles University in Prague, sent the manuscript to Kircher in 1665 or 1666. Marcy's cover letter, which was still attached when Voynich acquired the manuscript, is a key historical document. In it, Marcy mentions a Dr. Raphael, believed to be Raphael Soborodnishevsky, a known cryptographer and alchemist who claimed Emperor Rudolf II purchased the book for an astronomical sum of 600 ducats.
600 ducat.
Yeah, to give you a sense of scale, that's a substantial sum, equivalent to over 2 kilograms of gold, suggesting the emperor believed it held immense value. Dr. Raphael also enthusiastically claimed the author was Roger Bacon, the brilliant 13th century English polymath and Franciscan friar, famous for his early scientific methods.
But Marcy himself wasn't convinced.
No, Marcy wisely and cautiously suspended judgment on this Bacon claim, an important detail often overlooked by later enthusiasts. His skepticism is a clue in itself.
That's an enormous amount of money for a book if the story is true. So it stayed with Kircher in Rome for centuries after that.
Most likely, yes. It was probably stored in Kircher's extensive library at the Collegio Romano until 1870. That year, Italian forces captured Rome and annexed the Papal States, and the new government began confiscating many church properties, including the Collegio's vast library. To avoid confiscation and protect their valuable collections, many books were hastily moved to private faculty libraries or hidden away. The Voynich manuscript, bearing the ex libris of Petrus Bex, who was the head of the Jesuit order at the time, was among them. It was subsequently moved to Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit villa in Frascati outside Rome, where it remained for decades, largely forgotten by the wider world.
And that's where Wilfrid Voynich, the manuscript's namesake, enters the picture, isn't it? The man who brought it back into the public eye.
Exactly. In 1912, the Society of Jesus, facing financial needs, discreetly sold some of its extensive collection of manuscripts from the Villa Mondragone. Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer with a keen eye for rare volumes and a knack for self-promotion, acquired a cache of 30 manuscripts, including the one that now bears his name. He spent years obsessively trying to get scholars and cryptographers to decipher it, traveling to libraries and universities, convinced he had found something truly monumental. He died in 1930, still without a solution.
Wow.
It then passed to his widow, Ethel Voynich, a novelist and composer, then to Anne Nill, and finally to the antique book dealer Hans P. Krauss, who, unable to sell it himself, generously donated it to Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library in 1969. That's where it's cataloged as MS-408 and made globally accessible today.
So who did write it then? There are so many authorship hypotheses, and the Roger Bacon theory mentioned in the Marcy letter seems to be a perpetually popular one, despite its chronological issues.
Yeah, despite the initial excitement and the tantalizing mention in Marcy's letter, the 13th century Franciscan polymath, Roger Bacon, is now largely discredited as the author. The fundamental reason, as we discussed, is the precise 15th century carbon dating of the vellum. It simply wasn't made in Bacon's time.
Right.
The theory that John Dee or Edward Kelly, Bacon's later admirers who owned some of his manuscripts, might have written it, and perhaps even concocted the Roger Bacon rumor for later sale, is also weakened by this dating. Dee and Kelly were active in the late 16th century, still too late for the manuscript's creation.
So who else is in the running chronologically?
Well, other proposed authors, more consistent with the 15th century dating, include Giovanni Fontana, a 15th century Italian engineer. Fontana was known for using simple substitution ciphers in his own books, and some of his illustrations, particularly his fantastical mechanical devices, bear a slight stylistic resemblance to some of the Voynich's more obscure diagrams. There's also Antonio Avrelino, better known as Filarete, a 15th century North Italian architect whose work might align chronologically and geographically.
And what about that faded name, Jacob Tepenes, that was found on the first page? Was that the real author?
That faded name on F1R, which was visible to Voynich but now needs UV light, links to Jakub Hushiki of Tepenek, who was Rudolf II's head of botanical gardens in the early 17th century. This initially led some to believe he might have been the author or at least an early owner. However, most scholars now believe it was added later, perhaps even by Wilfrid Voynich himself, though a comparison to his known signature doesn't quite match. It remains one of those ambiguous clues that offers a potential lead, but ultimately frustrates.
This brings us to the ever-present shadow of the hoax hypothesis. Was this entire thing just a very elaborate prank designed to fool someone, perhaps even a powerful emperor?
It's a compelling thought for many, and it has been debated for a very long time. For a significant period, some suspected Wilfred Voynich himself was the forger. As an antique book dealer, he certainly had the knowledge and the motive. A lost Roger Bacon manuscript would be incredibly valuable. However, as we discussed, the 2009 radiocarbon dating, which conclusively placed the vellum's creation between 1404 and 1438, has effectively ruled out this possibility. Experts like the historian Eamon Duffy argue it's inconceivable that 14 or 15 unused calfskins of 15th century parchment could have survived intact for Voynich to use centuries later.
Right, especially in a way that matched everything else.
Exactly. Particularly in a manner that would perfectly align with the original text's inks and style. Plus, Georg Berich's 1639 letter definitively proves the manuscript existed long before Wilfred Voynich was even born, effectively closing the Voynich's forger chapter.
Okay, so if not Voynich, could it have been an earlier prank, perhaps orchestrated to fool someone as prominent as Kircher himself? Or even Emperor Rudolph II?
This is a strong and popular line of reasoning within the hoax camp. Some speculate that Raphael Mniszowski, the same Dr. Raphael who claimed the Bacon connection to Marcy, might have created it. Mniszowski was a known cryptographer and alchemist who famously boasted of devising an uncrackable cipher around 1618, right in the period before Berech acquired the manuscript. He might have produced the Voynich manuscript as a grand demonstration of his cipher's impenetrability, making Berech an unwitting subject in his elaborate academic game.
Huh. Like a proof of concept?
Possibly. This idea is further fueled by a prior, confirmed hoax played on Kircher by the Orientalist Andreas Müller, who sent him unintelligible text, delighting in Kircher's struggle to decipher it. Marcy's own disclaimer in his letter to Kircher, such sphinxes as these obey no one but their master Kircher, could subtly imply that even he suspected deception, perhaps hinting that only a master of deception like Kircher could solve such a riddle, or that he knew it was a riddle and was playing along.
That's a fascinating thought, that Marcy himself might have been giving a subtle hint. And there's Gordon Rugg's famous demonstration, isn't there? The one that showed how a hoax could be generated with simple tools.
Yes, in 2003, computer scientist Gordon Rugg famously demonstrated that text with remarkably similar statistical properties to the Voynich manuscript could be produced using a simple table of word prefixes, stems, and suffixes, selected via a perforated paper overlay, a device known as a cardan grill. You'd place the grill over the table, and the holes would reveal the letters or parts of words to copy. The major problem here, chronologically, is that the cardan grill was invented by Girolamo Cardano around 1550, over 100 years after the manuscript's estimated creation.
So the method might be anachronistic, but the idea of a systematically generated, meaningless text is still on the table.
Exactly. While the method might be anachronistic for the Voynich itself, Rugg's work powerfully demonstrated how such text, mimicking the Voynich's odd statistical regularities, could be generated artificially and systematically, not randomly.
Are there statistical arguments specifically for the hoax hypothesis that have emerged from this line of thinking?
Absolutely. Andreas Schinner, in 2007, published a study in the journal Cryptologia, arguing that the statistical properties of the manuscript's text were actually more consistent with meaningless gibberish, produced from a quasi-kitschastic method like Rugg's, rather than a natural language. He highlighted patterns that suggested artificial generation. Gordon Rugg and Gavin Taylor in 2016 further built on this, demonstrating that the grill method could reproduce not just small-scale features, but also larger-scale characteristics of the Voynich text. And then, in 2019, Torsten Timm and Andreas Schinner suggested a self-citation process, where scribes copied and modified meaningless words from earlier in the text could reproduce its characteristics, akin to a linguistic echo chamber. Most recently, in 2022, Daniel Gaskell and Claire Bowen conducted a revealing experiment where human participants were instructed to write meaningless text. They found that the resulting human-produced nonsense often exhibited many of the same unusual statistical properties, like high predictability at the character level and unique word formations, as the Voynich.
Wow.
Lending significant support to the hoax theory. It's almost unsettling to think that our natural inclination to create patterns, even in nonsense, could mimic something as complex as the Voynich.
But this battle isn't over yet, is it? What are the strongest counter-arguments, the pieces of evidence that fiercely resist the hoax theory and suggest genuine meaning within the Voynich?
Indeed, the debate rages on. Marcello Montemiro, a theoretical physicist, published findings in 2013 that directly challenged the hoax theory. He claimed that the text contained evidence of underlying semantic networks and clustered content-bearing words. He found that when the manuscript shifted topics, for example, from the herbal section to the astronomical, new words would appear, or words would cluster differently. He argued that these sophisticated features, indicative of underlying meaning, were simply unlikely to have been intentionally incorporated into a hoax.
Especially back then.
Exactly. Especially because the academic knowledge to understand and engineer such complex linguistic structures didn't even exist at the time the Voynich Manuscript would have been written. The level of linguistic sophistication, he argued, seemed beyond a simple 15th century prank. Similarly, Yale University researchers in 2021, using a technique called TF-IDF analysis, found that computed text clusters within the manuscript matched illustration topics. This means that words frequently appearing with plant illustrations rarely appeared with astronomical ones, and vice versa. This strong correlation between the text and the images across different sections provides compelling evidence of meaningful text and internal coherence that would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to achieve with random or mechanically generated gibberish.
Suggesting a level of coherence that goes beyond simple random nonsense. So it's a constant tug of war between the meaningful and the meaningless, the cipher and the hoax, with compelling arguments on both sides. But no matter which side you lean on, the modern obsession with the Voynich manuscript is undeniable. The internet, AI, and even conspiracy theorists keep this mystery vibrantly alive, transforming it into a global phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely. The digital age has truly revolutionized Voynich research, and it has also become a graveyard for prematurely announced decipherment claims. The internet has opened up the field to everyone, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse.
Let's run through some of those claims because they highlight how many different avenues have been explored and often how human biases or overeagerness can lead us astray. Early on, William Romain Newbold, in 1921, famously claimed microscopic markos formed a second script, proving Roger Bacon's authorship, an incredibly bold assertion.
Right. Newbold's hypothesis was that tiny, barely visible markings, only apparent under high magnification, were not just random ink artifacts, but formed a second, hidden script based on ancient Greek shorthand. He claimed to have used this to translate paragraphs, allegedly proving Bacon's authorship, and even suggesting Bacon had used a compound microscope centuries before such technology was widely known.
Which sounds groundbreaking, if true.
If true. But John Matthews Manley, a formidable American cryptologist, thoroughly debunked this. He proved that Newbold's markings were just ink-drying artifacts, or what we now call pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli. Manley demonstrated that Newbold's method was so flexible and subjective that it could be used to produce almost any desired text, effectively discrediting his entire theory.
Ouch. Then there were the efforts of Joseph Martin Feely and Lionel C. Strong, both convinced they had cracked it.
Feely, in 1943, continued the Roger Bacon line, claiming it was Bacon's scientific diary, written in highly abbreviated medieval Latin. But scholars quickly rejected his proposed system as inconsistent and unconvincing. Then, Lionel C. Strong, a cancer research scientist, entered the fray in 1947. He proposed a peculiar double system of arithmetical progressions of a multiple alphabet, a rather complex mathematical approach. He even claimed a translation of 2 pages and identified Anthony Ascham, a 16th century English astrologer and physician, as the author. However, notes released after his death revealed the final stages of his analysis were questionably subjective, relying on highly speculative jumps.
So another dead end.
Pretty much. The sheer variety of proposed languages and methods, from Latin to Ukrainian, really shows how desperate researchers are for a solution, often projecting their own linguistic or historical knowledge onto the text.
Robert S. Brumbo's take was that it was a forgery designed to fool Rudolph II in ciphered Latin, and John Stochko claimed it was vowelless Ukrainian in letters to God's eye.
Yeah. Brumbo, an American medievalist, asserted in 1978 that it was indeed a forgery intended to fool Rudolph II, specifically in ciphered Latin. Stochko, also in 1978, claimed it was vowelless Ukrainian, a theory that gained some traction within the Ukrainian diaspora. However, it was widely criticized by linguists for a general lack of empirical evidence and a very loose, subjective decryption method. These claims, though often made with great confidence, highlight the challenges of working with such ambiguous data. It's easy to find what you're looking for if the rules are flexible enough.
Moving to more recent times, with the advent of AI and computational linguistics, one might expect breakthroughs. Stephen Bax, who we mentioned earlier, made a partial decode.
Yes, in 2014, Professor Stephen Bax published a provisional partial decoding of 14 characters and 10 words, using a bottom-up methodology similar to how ancient scripts like Egyptian hieroglyphs were first deciphered. He focused on identifying recurrent patterns in the text that appeared alongside identifiable images, like zodiac signs or plants that could be linked to known names in various languages. He suggested it was a Near Eastern or Asian natural language treatise, but he passed away before a full translation could be completed, leaving his work unfinished. A tantalizing hint rather than a full solution.
Now, what about AI and computational linguistics getting involved? Greg Kondrak, for example, used computational linguistics to suggest Hebrew.
Right. Greg Kondrak and his student Bradley Hauer used computational linguistics in 2017 to suggest the language was Hebrew, specifically encoded using alphagrams, alphabetically ordered anagrams of words. For example, bread might become abder. They trained algorithms on texts in various languages to find patterns. However, even the team admitted that experts in medieval manuscripts who reviewed their work were not convinced.
So the algorithms found patterns, but they didn't necessarily make historical or linguistic sense.
Exactly. It highlights that while technology can identify patterns, understanding historical context, linguistic nuances, and human intent is still incredibly challenging, and sometimes beyond the scope of purely statistical methods.
It seems like every few years a new claim emerges, often with great fanfare in the popular press, only to be swiftly debunked by the scholarly community. Nicholas Gibbs, for instance, made headlines.
Nicholas Gibbs, a television writer and medieval history enthusiast, famously claimed in 2017 to have decoded it as idiosyncratically abbreviated Latin, specifically a guide to women's health. He proposed that the text was a series of medical recipes with abbreviations that medieval scribes would understand. But scholars, including the prominent medieval manuscript expert Lisa Fagan-Davis, heavily criticized this as speculative, inconsistent, and ultimately nonsensical Latin. She even publicly expressed surprise and dismay that a reputable publication like the Times Literary Supplement would publish such an unverified claim.
Yeah, that caused quite a stir.
It did, demonstrating how susceptible even established media can be to the allure of a solved mystery.
And Gerard Cheshire's equally bold claims about calligraphic proto-romance, which garnered a lot of attention just a few years ago.
Oh, Gerard Cheshire's 2019 claims were particularly controversial and met with widespread scholarly condemnation. He, a biology research assistant at the University of Bristol at the time, astonishingly stated he decoded it in just 2 weeks as calligraphic proto-romance, an ancestral language of modern Romance languages. He asserted it was a compendium from Maria of Castile, written by Dominican nuns, focusing heavily on female health. He even claimed a specific fold-out depicted a volcano, placing his creators near the active volcano island in Italy.
In 2 weeks, that sounds extremely fast. And experts, most notably Lisa Fagan-Davis again, vigorously disputed this. She called his logic circular and aspirational, arguing his translations are essentially gibberish, an amalgam of multiple languages, rather than actual coherent translations. The academic community largely dismissed his claims, and significantly, the University of Bristol itself subsequently removed references to his claims from its website, issuing a public statement noting concerns about the validity of the research.
Wow.
These rapid cycles of exciting claim followed by definitive debunking are almost as much a part of the Voynich story as the manuscript itself.
Wow, that's a strong rejection.
Yeah.
It really shows how difficult and contentious the decipherment field is. But despite these setbacks and the constant cycle of claims and debunkings, the internet has undeniably played a massive transformative role in keeping the mystery alive and fueling this global obsession, hasn't it? It has democratized research in an unprecedented way, turning a once niche academic pursuit into a global collective endeavor. In 2004, Yale University's Beinecke Library made high-resolution digital scans publicly available online. This was a monumental game changer, allowing anyone with an internet connection to pore over every detail of the manuscript. Then, in 2016, a scholarly facsimile was co-published with Yale University Press, and in 2017, a Spanish publisher, Siloé, even produced a limited print run of 898 physical replicas.
So people could actually hold a copy.
Exactly, so people could literally hold a near-perfect copy of the mystery. Most recently, multispectral scans of selected pages were made public in 2024, revealing previously unseen details that might offer new clues.
So anyone, anywhere from a seasoned cryptographer to a curious amateur, can now scrutinize these pages in incredible detail that must have changed the game for research.
Totally. This open access has fueled a massive global community of amateur and professional cryptographers, linguists, historians, and general enthusiasts. They share theories, discuss findings, collaborate on analyst websites, mailing lists, and specialized forums like Voynich Ninja.
Yeah.
It's no longer just a few select academics working in isolation in ivory towers. It's a vast, decentralized collective intelligence continually probing the mystery. This has significantly accelerated the pace of both analysis and, unfortunately, the generation and debunking of new theories.
And it continues to draw cutting-edge technology, particularly AI and computational linguistics, seeking patterns that human eyes or minds might miss.
Yes, deep learning algorithms are now being specifically applied to analyze its language families, its morphology, and its statistical properties in ways never before possible. This is what led to intriguing suggestions like the recent resemblance to ancient scripts, such as Kochki. While no definitive answer has emerged from AI yet, the sheer computational power and pattern recognition capabilities offer new hope for statistical breakthroughs, if not a full translation. It's a true test case for what AI can achieve in historical and linguistic analysis.
The Voynich Manuscript has certainly cemented its place not just in academic debate, but in popular culture. It's more than just a historical puzzle. It's become a symbol of the unknown, of ultimate secrets.
It's truly permeated culture across various mediums. Its enduring inscrutability has inspired a wide array of fiction, from direct references in video games like Indiana Jones and the Philosopher's Stone to novels like Lev Grossman's Codex and Deborah Harkness's The Book of Life. Visual artists have been influenced by it too. Luigi Serafini's Codex Seraphinianus, a real-life art book with its own false writing system and imaginary plants, is a direct and beautiful homage to the Voynich's aesthetic.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating book in its own right.
It is. It's inspired classical music, webcomics, and countless online discussions, debates, and even elaborate role-playing games. It represents the ultimate unknown, a blank page onto which we project our deepest curiosities about knowledge, secrecy, and the very limits of human understanding. Its mystery is its greatest asset, ensuring its perennial fascination.
From its 15th century vellum to its strange composite plants and bathing nymphs, the Voynich manuscript remains a stubborn, beautiful puzzle. We've seen how centuries of brilliant minds, from alchemists to World War codebreakers and modern computational linguists, have tried to crack its code, only to be met with more questions.
Its unique statistical properties, its baffling illustrations, and its tantalizing but inconclusive historical trail all contribute to a mystery that has simply refused to be solved. Every new method applied, every new theory proposed, seems to underscore just how extraordinary and singular this book truly is, defying easy categorization or simple solutions.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, holding this knowledge about the ultimate mystery? Is the Voynich manuscript a lost ancient language, a brilliant but unbreakable cipher, a profound philosophical or scientific text, or the most elaborate and successful hoax in history, perhaps even a stream of consciousness from a mind grappling with a profound, unshareable experience? The Voynich manuscript continues to be a profound mystery. What new methods or what fundamental shift in perspective might one day truly unlock its deepest secrets, or will its profound silence forever be its most compelling answer?